I'm Emily Carter, 32 years old, soldier, strategist, and at least in my family, the daughter they never wanted at the table. For years, I thought discipline and sacrifice would earn me respect. I was wrong. At home, loyalty was measured in stock prices and titles. My brother Daniel was the golden heir, raised to inherit the Carter name, toasted like royalty. My service? Reduced to a childish phase. My medals meant nothing against his smirk, and my silence was treated as proof I didn't belong. That illusion shattered the night my father raised his glass, not to me, but to Daniel, while I sat invisible 2 seats away. And when Daniel leaned back, lips curled, and called me the useless one, that was the moment I stopped waiting for their approval. Ever been erased from your own family's story? Hit like if someone ever mocked your worth, and comment if you've ever had to prove them wrong. For me, it started at the Carter family dinner where I wasn't their daughter. I was the punchline. I sat 2 seats down from my father, my hands folded in my lap, trying to still the restless twitch of my fingers. I sat 2 seats down from my father, my hands folded in my lap, trying to still the restless twitch of my fingers. Richard Carter stood at the head of the long mahogany table, glass raised high, his posture regal, his smile all teeth. He looked proud, no, more than proud, triumphant as he lifted his voice to honor his golden son. To Daniel, he declared, his baritone filling the cavernous dining hall, the future of the Carter name, the man who will carry this family's legacy into the next generation of corporate triumphs. The relatives erupted in polite laughter, in nods and murmurs of approval, as if my father were announcing the birth of royalty. The chandeliers above scattered their light across polished silverware and untouched plates, illuminating Daniel's smirk like it had been staged. My brother basked in it, leaned back in his chair with the arrogance of a man who believed the world tilted in his favor. I lifted my glass, but only enough to avoid notice. His toast wasn't meant for me. I was invisible in this room, except when someone remembered to make me the butt of their jokes. Aunt Patricia leaned in across the table, her pearls glinting with the practiced superiority of old money. Her smile was sugar-dipped acid. "Emily, dear," she drawled, "do you still play soldier? Running around in those dusty uniforms, pretending at war games?" The word play cut deeper than she realized. Or maybe she knew exactly what she was doing. My military service, my sacrifices, the nights I had bled into foreign soil, all reduced to a parlor game by a woman who had never lifted more than a wineglass. I forced a chuckle, but my throat burned. "Something like that," I said. Daniel swooped in, piling insult onto injury with the ease of a predator smelling blood. "Maybe I can get you an entry-level job, sis," he said, raising his glass as though it were a benevolent gesture. "A little filing, a little coffee fetching. You'd look cute with a clipboard." Laughter erupted down the line of relatives, an echo chamber of mockery. Even Margaret, my mother, tried to mask her discomfort with a thin smile, her fingers fidgeting with her napkin. She would never contradict Richard, never challenge Daniel. Silence was her armor, and it cut me sharper than words. I sat there, still and small, but my mind was roaring. Every giggle, every smirk, every condescending glance carved deeper into the stone of my resolve. I thought of the endless drills, the gunmetal skies, the comrades who never came home. I had survived real battlefields yet here, in my own home. I was stripped of dignity by blood relatives who measured worth only in stock prices and titles. Richard leaned closer to Daniel, clapping his shoulder with paternal pride. "This is what legacy looks like. Daniel understands loyalty, dedication, results." His eyes skimmed over me as though I were a chair out of place. Daniel seized the moment, his smirk widening. "Face it, Emily," he said, loud enough for every fork to pause midair, every conversation to hush. "In this family, you're the useless one." The words struck like gunfire, swift and irrevocable. My jaw tightened. My fingers curled around the stem of my glass, pressure mounting until I feared it might shatter. The weight of their laughter pressed against my chest, tried to suffocate me, but I refused to give them that satisfaction. I raised the glass, plastered a brittle smile across my face, and swallowed down the bitterness like cheap wine. My eyes scanned the room, Richard's gloating, Daniel's smugness, Margaret's silence, the relatives' gleeful malice, and I branded it all into memory. This wasn't humiliation. This was fuel. I leaned back, my smile unwavering, and whispered in the fortress of my mind words none of them would ever forget once the curtain fell. "Tomorrow, useless will wear stars." They saw failure at the dinner table, the Pentagon saw a colonel. The night swallowed me as I pulled out of the Carter estate, headlights carving pale beams through the frost on the driveway. My grip on the wheel was tighter than I realized, knuckles pale, veins rising like fault lines under my skin. Every echo of their laughter clung to me, replaying in the silence of the car. Useless one. The phrase clung like smoke, acrid and lingering. I drove faster, as if the city lights ahead could burn it away. By the time I reached my penthouse, the skyline had shifted from mocking shadows to a glittering horizon, steel and glass towering like sentinels. I parked, rode the elevator up, and unlocked the door to my sanctuary. Inside, the world of the Carters vanished. No mahogany tables, no condescending relatives, just glass walls framing the city, the soft hum of security systems, and the quiet dignity of solitude. I tossed my coat over the armchair and poured a drink I didn't taste. My silence at dinner had been my only weapon there, but here, silence gave way to command. The phone buzzed, a secure line lighting up with a single name, General James Harrison. Colonel Carter, his voice rumbled as soon as I answered, a voice that carried the weight of continents. We have a problem. Orion can't wait. I straightened, spine snapping into its natural posture. I'm listening. He didn't waste words. Carter and Cole has become a liability. Hacker infiltration attempts confirmed classified systems, backdoor routes we traced right to their networks. If their infrastructure folds, so does national security. Tomorrow's board meeting isn't just corporate theater, it's survival. My pulse quickened, not from nerves, but recognition of the stakes. I crossed the room, entered the code on a biometric safe, and withdrew a thin black case. Inside lay a classified dossier stamped with the seal that had defined my life. United States Department of Defense. I spread the files across the desk. Charts, intercepts, encrypted chatterproof of foreign infiltration pressing against the very walls of the company my family treated as their birthright. The irony was surgical. While Richard toasted Daniel's promotion, their empire teetered on the brink of collapse, saved only by the daughter they mocked. James's tone sharpened. Emily, you've done the hard work. You've run this op under their noses for months. Tomorrow, you won't just attend a meeting, you'll hold their survival in your hands. I swallowed, the weight of his words landing like a metal pinned to my chest. My reflection caught in the glass wall, the city burning bright behind me, the faint outline of a soldier in civilian clothes. Crossing to the dresser, I opened another box, this one filled not with secrets, but with symbols. Rows of medals glimmered under the soft light, tokens of campaigns no one at that dinner table had ever asked about. I lifted one, felt its cool edge against my fingertips, and met my own gaze in the mirror. Colonel Emily Carter. Before they called me useless, they called me unworthy. The memory still burns, sharper than any battlefield scar. 10 years ago, I stood inside the boardroom of Carter and Cole, a girl on the cusp of adulthood, my heart beating like a drumline under the fluorescent lights. The long conference table stretched before me, a polished altar to money and legacy. At its head, Richard Carter sat with a fountain pen poised like a scepter, Daniel lounging smugly at his side. Papers were neatly stacked documents that would carve the future of our family with the precision of a blade. I had dressed with care that morning, a navy suit borrowed from my mother's closet, the shoulders slightly too broad, the sleeves grazing my wrists. I wanted to look ready. I wanted him to see me as something more than the daughter he tolerated. Richard's gaze cut through me as though I were a shadow interrupting his light. He pressed the pen to the page and announced, his voice flat and final, Daniel Carter will inherit controlling shares, effective immediately. My stomach dropped. I tried to steady my breath. Father, what about me? I've studied. I've interned. I know the company inside and out. I want the chance to... His eyes narrowed, silencing me with disdain. This world is no place for you, Emily. Business is blood and iron. Daniel was born for it. You were not. Daniel leaned back in his chair, grin curling at the corners of his mouth. He didn't need to say anything. His smirk told me the story he believed would define my life. Second place. Forever. Across the table, Emma shifted uncomfortably, her eyes avoiding mine. She had always been quieter than the rest, her loyalty to the family tempered by an instinct for kindness. As Richard slid the signed papers toward Daniel, Emma's lips parted just slightly, and when the others turned away, she leaned close enough for only me to hear. Don't give up. 2 words, whispered like contraband, tucked into my heart like a hidden blade. The memory fractured, dissolving into the present. I blinked and found myself at my desk in the penthouse, the glow of city lights bouncing off steel and glass. In my hand, I held the same letter of rejection Richard had given me after that meeting, its edges softened from years of folding and unfolding, the ink still sharp as a wound. I laid it carefully beside the classified dossier spread across my desk, the betrayal of blood beside the betrayal of country, twin reminders of the rot beneath the Carter name. My reflection in the window looked back at me, older, hardened, forged by choices neither Richard nor Daniel could comprehend. Tomorrow would not be a plea for acceptance. Tomorrow, I would wield the scars they gave me as weapons. Tomorrow, the Carter name won't define me, I'll redefine it. Every insult they threw at me was fuel, and I was done collecting. The Pentagon felt different before dawn. The corridors were quieter, shadows stretched long under fluorescent lights, and the air held that metallic tang of recycled oxygen and tension. I walked with measured steps toward the secure conference room, the echoes of my boots steady, deliberate. Every step was a reminder. I wasn't coming here to beg for a place at the Carter table anymore. I was here to prove that I had already built one they could never touch. Inside, the conference room glowed with the pale light of monitors and projection screens. Generals and cybersecurity officers were already gathered, fatigue etched on their faces, coffee steaming in cups, lined up like tired soldiers. James Harrison sat at the head, posture rigid, eyes sharp even at this hour. Colonel Carter, he greeted with the slightest nod. Titles here weren't ornamental, they were shields, weapons, acknowledgments of battles fought and won. Here, unlike in that mansion, mine mattered. I connected my laptop to the central screen, and rows of charts and breach reports cascaded across the wall. Carter and Cole's network is bleeding vulnerabilities, I began, voice steady. We've confirmed 3 separate infiltration attempts in the last 6 weeks. 2 were contained, 1 slipped through a third-party contractor. Their firewalls are outdated. Encryption keys have been recycled across departments. If they were anyone else, we would have cut the cord already. A murmur rippled through the room, frustration and disbelief laced in equal measure. James raised a hand, silencing them. His tone was grave, unyielding. Let's be clear. Non-compliance means total shutdown of government contracts. No grace period, no second chances. If they can't meet federal security standards, Carter and Cole ceases operations on every classified project immediately. The words hung heavy in the air. I could almost hear Richard's voice, drunk on legacy, insisting no one would dare challenge the Carters. He was wrong. Tomorrow, the board would face reality, and I would be the messenger. My laptop pinged, sharp against the hush of the room. A notification slid across the corner of the screen. I didn't need to open it to know who it was from. I did anyway. The subject line, "Still time to redeem yourself, sis." I clicked. Daniel's words leapt at me, dripping with the same smugness I'd endured for decades. You don't have to embarrass yourself tomorrow. I can get you a desk job. Answer phones, maybe. Better than nothing. I almost laughed. In the middle of classified breach reports, while the fate of their empire teetered, Daniel thought he still held the power to dangle scraps in front of me. His arrogance was the family's disease, chronic and terminal. I closed the email without replying, a small smirk tugging at my lips. The irony was too perfect he offered me pity, while unknowingly standing on the edge of a cliff I had prepared. He'll regret every word tomorrow. James's gaze cut toward me, reading more in my expression than I spoke aloud. He leaned forward, voice low, commanding. Colonel, be ready. The board convenes at 9. The night before the storm is always the quietest. My penthouse was wrapped in silence. The kind of silence that presses on your skin, that makes every heartbeat sound like a drumbeat in the dark. Outside, the city glowed faintly under December frost, headlights tracing patterns across wet streets far below. But up here, there was only me, the hum of the radiator, and the weight of tomorrow. I laid the uniform across the bed with deliberate care, smoothing each fold, aligning each crease until it looked more like armor than fabric. The metals gleamed faintly in the low light, silent witnesses to years of sacrifice and battles no one at the Carter dinner table had ever asked about, much less cared to understand. My hands hovered above the ribbons before fastening them to the jacket, one by one, each click echoing like the loading of a chamber. Every insult they had ever thrown at me useless, unworthy, disappointment, crystallized into polished metal that told a different story. The family's laughter still rang in my ears, distorted echoes from just hours ago. Daniel's smirk, Richard's toast, Margaret's cool detachment they replayed like a cruel refrain. I pressed my palm against the fabric of the jacket, grounding myself in what was real. Not their illusions, not their hierarchy, not their damn legacy. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message lit the screen. Emily, please think about settling down. A woman can't survive alone. Margaret, always polite cruelty, masked as care. Always reminding me that independence was a flaw to be cured, not a strength to be celebrated. I stared at the words, jaw tightening, then typed my reply with calm precision. I'm not alone. I have my command. The three dots appeared, then vanished. No answer. Typical. Even when she reached out, she recoiled from the truth. I moved to the desk, opening the classified dossier one last time. The glow of the monitor painted the room in sterile blue. Lines of data scrolled past breach attempts, internal emails, signatures of foreign hackers clawing at Carter and Cole's fragile network. Evidence sharp enough to cut through every lie tomorrow. I bookmarked the crucial files, saving them to the encrypted drive I would carry with me into the boardroom. My fingers lingered on the keyboard, not from doubt, but from the weight of inevitability. Reaching for the shelf, I pulled down the framed Academy photo. A girl stared back at me, 18 years old. Chin lifted despite the shadows of rejection already forming behind her. That day, Richard had told me the Carter name wasn't mine to carry, that the company's bloodline belonged to Daniel. I had smiled through the sting, sworn I wouldn't break. Now, a decade later, that promise trembled between my fingers. The glass of the frame was cool against my skin, anchoring me between past and present. I set the photo beside the uniform, a silent reminder that the girl who had been cast out was the woman who would return, not begging at the gates, but holding the keys. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, hands creeping toward the inevitable. My chest rose with a steady inhale, slow exhale. The second hand aligned with the 12, and the chime split the silence. Midnight. Tomorrow, they'll meet Colonel Carter. They thought today would crown Daniel instead. It would bury him. The elevator doors slid open with a hiss, releasing me into the hushed, marbled corridor of Carter and Cole's 50th floor. I didn't step forward yet. Instead, I lingered just out of sight, letting the echoes from beyond the great mahogany doors carry toward me. Their voices, smug, entitled, unshaken, filled the space like smoke from a cigar. Inside, Richard was in his element. Today, gentlemen, we secure our legacy. His words rolled with the practiced authority of a man who believed himself untouchable. He had spoken some version of this line all his life over dinners, at fundraisers, in backroom deals where his handshake was a coronation. But now, those same words tasted like overripe fruit. I could picture his posture without seeing it. Shoulders squared, chin up, hand tightening around a crystal glass he didn't need. And beside him Daniel, my brother. His voice carried next, oozing confidence but empty of depth. He was outlining a strategy so shallow it made my pulse quicken with a mix of disgust and anticipation. Our competitors don't innovate, they react, he declared. We'll double down on existing contracts, cut overhead, and push for aggressive acquisition. The room answered with polite applause, but beneath it I caught the faintest tremor. A cough too quick. A throat clearing that tried to disguise dissent. A few board members exchanged glances, men and women too practiced at poker faces to let their doubt linger in the open, but it was there, skepticism, faint but growing. And yet Richard pressed on, sweeping the moment under the rug as if he controlled even their thoughts. This is why Daniel leads us forward. This is why Carter and Cole will not merely survive, but dominate. His voice sharpened. Loyalty is our greatest asset. The word loyalty hit me like a ghost of last night's toast, ringing in my ears with a cruel symmetry. Loyalty. A trait they never offered me, yet demanded of everyone else. I clenched my jaw in the hallway, invisible, while the board clapped again, the sound thinner this time, brittle against the polished wood of the table. I imagined Daniel's smirk spreading wider, basking in their forced approval. His arrogance was palpable, even here in the corridor. He was born into entitlement, spoon-fed victory, so sure the crown had always been his. The secretary at her desk tapped her keyboard, oblivious to the quiet battle already brewing in the room. Papers shuffled. A projector hummed faintly as slides changed inside. My hands rested at my sides, the uniform's fabric tight across my shoulders, medals concealed for now beneath the coat. The weight of them steadied me. From beyond the doors, one board member dared to speak. Daniel, these strategies, do they account for the increasing cybersecurity incidents? We've been warned. Richard's interruption was swift, a blade cutting off dissent. Handled, he said, voice commanding. We are not here to indulge paranoia. The future of Carter and Cole is secure. With Daniel at the helm, gentlemen, our name will echo for generations. A pause followed. Too long, too uneasy. Then came the scattered applause again, obligatory, shallow as Daniel's promises. The secretary stood, her voice carried above the muffled tension. General James Harrison has arrived. The room fell silent. The name landed like an iron weight on the table. Chairs shifted. Confidence faltered. For the first time that morning, uncertainty rippled through the air. And, the secretary added, eyes flicking toward the hall where I stood waiting. He's brought someone. I stepped forward. The doors swung wide, flooding me with morning sunlight. Every metal on my chest caught the light, every crease of the uniform sharp as a blade. Conversations died mid-breath. Richard's glass froze halfway to his lips. Daniel's smirk faltered into confusion. Their stares locked on me as if I were a ghost walking out of their past. I crossed the threshold, steady, unflinching. The uniform gleamed. For the first time in years, silence served me. The boardroom froze in that silence, as if every breath had been stolen by the sight of the uniform on my shoulders. The Carter crest etched into the glass walls no longer belonged to them alone. It framed me, reflected me, amplifying a truth they had tried so hard to erase. Their empire, their legacy, their name, all of it, suddenly fragile in the face of a reality they had never considered. That the daughter they had discarded now stood as their judge. James stepped forward with a calm authority that carried across the polished oak table. His voice was steady, deliberate, meant to cut through the confusion and disbelief. Allow me to introduce Colonel Emily Carter, Head of Cyber Defense, United States Army. The words detonated like artillery fire. A ripple of gasps traveled the length of the table. A few chairs scraped back in surprise. Richard's jaw tightened, the color draining from his face, while Daniel's mouth hung open in disbelief, his arrogance swallowed by the shock. I advanced, each step deliberate, the sound of my heels tapping against the hardwood echoing louder than any applause Daniel had received moments earlier. Their stares clung to the medals I had polished last night, eyes flicking to the ribbons that represented not privilege but grit, not inheritance but scars. The quiet weight of those medals silenced every voice in the room. I reached the head of the table opposite Richard and set a thick dossier onto the projector. The machine whirred to life, casting classified seals and redacted lines across the glass wall. I didn't need to raise my voice. The silence gave me all the space I needed. Your systems, I said evenly, are a national risk. Pages flicked on screen graphs, breach logs, timelines of infiltration attempts. Each slide struck like a hammer against their illusions of control. For months, Carter and Cole's networks have been bleeding data. Foreign entities have infiltrated your infrastructure. If not for military intervention, your contracts with the Department of Defense would already be terminated. Whispers darted between board members, sharp and frantic. Richard shifted uncomfortably, his swagger cracking at the edges. Daniel fumbled for composure, but no clever quip arrived to save him. I looked directly at them, voice steady but cold. Without my approval, Carter and Cole collapses. Government contracts revoked. Assets frozen. Legacy erased. The projector's glow caught Richard's face, pale and twisted in a struggle between disbelief and rage. His lips parted, then shut, as if words had abandoned him. For once, the patriarch who had always commanded every room sat powerless, watching as the daughter he had called useless claimed the authority he never thought she'd hold. Daniel finally found his voice, a choked, nervous laugh that fooled no one. This is absurd, Emily. You can't just... I cut him off with nothing more than a glance. Years of his mockery had taught me how to endure. Today, it was he who couldn't withstand my silence. The room tilted toward me now. Eyes once loyal to Richard shifted, calculating, measuring survival against the weight of the truth I had just laid bare. They were sharks sensing blood in the water, and my father had just been wounded. Richard surged to his feet, his chair screeching across the floor, his voice breaking the silence at last. Emily, what the hell is this? The higher they sat, the harder they would fall. The glow of the projector painted the boardroom in shades of red graphs, breach logs, and red-lettered warnings sprawling across the glass walls like bloodstains. No chandelier sparkle, no polished wood could hide the truth pulsing on that screen. Their empire was cracked wide open, and I held the pieces in my hands. I let the silence drag, the kind that forces men in power to confront the sound of their own fear. Then I pointed at the chart glowing behind me. These breaches didn't just happen overnight. They've been festering under Carter and Cole's nose for months, and the source of the weakness, the consistent, glaring entry point, is Daniel's division. Gasps, sharp intakes of breath, the shuffle of papers as if they could hide behind them. I saw the flicker in Daniel's eyes, the flush of shame rising beneath his smug veneer. Hours ago, he'd sent me an email offering me a desk job, a lifeline he thought I needed. Now the irony hung in the air like smoke, choking him more than anyone else. Board members exchanged uneasy looks, their polished masks slipping. Loyalty began to shift, replaced by calculation. Richard slammed his palm against the table, rattling the crystal glasses. His voice roared, but the cracks in it betrayed him. "This is extortion!" James stepped forward, his presence steady as iron. "No, Mr. Carter," he said, voice low but unyielding. "This is national security. You don't negotiate with a colonel when the Pentagon is involved, you comply." The words carried weight that silenced the room. Richard's face twisted, torn between outrage and fear. Daniel clenched his fists, veins rising against his knuckles, as if brute force could hold together what his arrogance had shattered. I straightened, letting my metals catch the light again. "You have 24 hours, I said, my voice calm, measured. "Accept full oversight by my division, or be classified as a security threat. If that happens, every contract evaporates, every investor pulls out, and Carter and Cole becomes nothing more than a headline about hubris." The room buzzed to life, whispers hissing down the table, board members leaning into one another with nervous urgency. Pens tapped against paper. Someone muttered about liability. Another whispered about government audits. Fear was contagious, and I had just infected them all. Richard's knuckles whitened around the arm of his chair. Daniel's jaw tightened so hard I thought his teeth might crack, but neither of them spoke. They had built their lives on dominance, on never yielding. Now, they had no choice but to listen. I held their silence like a weapon, knowing it was sharper than any blade. The board's whispers grew louder. Daniel clenched his fist tighter, knuckles trembling, every ounce of his arrogance collapsing into desperation. Cornered men don't surrender quietly, they lash out. The boardroom air still vibrated with the aftershocks of my ultimatum. I could feel the weight of every whisper, the uneasy shuffle of papers, the cold gleam in Richard's eyes. A recess had been called, 20 minutes to collect thoughts, but everyone knew it was 20 minutes for scheming. The men who had built empires on manipulation weren't about to fold simply because their daughter returned in uniform. Richard's words from years ago burned in my memory. The Carters always control the narrative. He had drilled that into Daniel as if it were scripture. Now, I watched them reach for it like drowning men clawing at the surface. I stepped into the hallway outside the boardroom, my uniform catching the curious eyes of assistants and interns, the click of reporters' cameras already echoing from the lobby below. They smelled blood, and Richard knew how to feed them. From the corner of my eye, I saw Daniel leaning against a marble column, a smug grin painted too confidently across his face. His hand slid a manila folder into the hands of a journalist dressed too formally to be here by accident. Their exchange was quick, but not quick enough to escape me. The glint in Daniel's eye told me exactly what it was. A planted story, a smear meant to undercut everything I had just built in that room. Minutes later, the vibration of phones buzzed across the conference table as we reconvened. One headline glared up from a glowing screen. "Colonel Carter under scrutiny. Political favoritism behind rapid rise?" The words slithered like venom through the board. Murmurs spread instantly. A director at the far end frowned, scrolling his phone. Another whispered too loudly, "If this is true, her credibility is compromised." The chain reaction was immediate: suspicion, hesitation, doubt. Daniel leaned back in his chair, smugness restored, watching me absorb the hit. Richard leaned forward, lips curling into the smirk I had grown up despising. "See?" he hissed, his voice slicing through the uneasy chatter. "You're nothing but a paper soldier propped up by politics, a uniform without substance, a name they gifted you because they felt sorry for you." The laughter that followed wasn't from the board, it was Richard's alone, dark and sharp. But it carried the echo of old dinners, old humiliations. For a heartbeat, it felt like I was 18 again, dismissed, diminished, powerless. Then I caught Emma's eyes across the table. My cousin hadn't spoken a word all morning, but there was something in her look, quiet defiance, a reminder of the whisper she'd once given me when Richard cut me out of the company. Don't give up. She still hadn't. Neither had I. I steadied my breath, hands resting on the leather case beside me. Inside was the dossier, the true weapon I had prepared, evidence that went beyond rumors and headlines, the kind of truth no smear campaign could erase. My fingers brushed the clasp, but I didn't open it. Not yet. Timing was everything, and Richard had just shown me his hand too soon. I let my voice cut through the noise, quiet, but undeniable. Not yet, Dad. Not yet. They thought they'd buried me, but I'd only sharpened my blade. The boardroom had gone tomb. Silent. The kind of silence where reputations hang in the air like smoke. The smear piece still lingered on their phones, but I could see the doubt already beginning to fracture. Doubt cuts both ways. Richard thought he'd driven it into me. He hadn't realized I'd forged it into a weapon. I rose, sliding my leather briefcase onto the table. The sound of the clasp snapping open echoed louder than Richard's earlier rant. My hands moved with deliberate calm. The years of waiting for this moment made me immune to their stares. James nodded once, the steady anchor at my side. Emma leaned forward ever so slightly, eyes fixed, silently urging me on. One keystroke, and the projector lit up with the first slide. Carter and Cole's internal emails, Daniel's name stamped on every thread. My voice didn't tremble, didn't rush. Here, I said, pointing to the highlighted chain. Daniel authorizes shortcuts in firewall development despite repeated warnings from cybersecurity staff. He signed off anyway. And here, another slide. Richard intervenes to bury the whistleblower's reports. Gentlemen, this isn't conjecture. It's a trail. Gasps rose like ripples across the polished table. Board members leaned forward, reading, scrolling, checking dates. One muttered, "My God," another whispered. He knew. I wasn't finished. A second file bloomed on the screen, red-coded and stamped, classified Operation Orion. The room stiffened. This, I said, is what you weren't told. Hackers didn't just attempt to exploit Carter and Cole's vulnerabilities. They succeeded. Operation Orion intercepted an infiltration traced directly to our systems. Classified data skimmed off, contracts compromised, all because your heirs ignored warnings. Daniel went pale, his bravado evaporating. He shifted in his chair as if it might swallow him whole. Richard tried to bark a protest, but James stepped forward, his voice a hammer. Only Colonel Carter can neutralize the threat. Ignore her, and you're finished. This isn't about politics. This isn't about family disputes. It's survival. The weight of his words broke the last illusion of control. Board members no longer whispered, they demanded answers. Voices clashing, accusations flung toward Richard and Daniel. A few turned on them outright. You endangered us. You risked government contracts. The tide was irreversible. The board chair, a man who had sat in silence too long, slammed his gavel down, the crack cutting through the chaos. Effective immediately, Carter and Cole accepts Colonel Carter's terms, he declared, his voice carrying finality. Or collapses by dawn. Richard's mask cracked for the first time. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the table, eyes locking onto mine with fury, disbelief, and a fear he would never admit. His voice broke when he finally spoke, a rasp of betrayal. You planned this, all along. For the first time in his life, my father looked small. The boardroom that once felt like Richard Carter's private throne room had become his tribunal. The air was heavy with the stench of power turned sour. Just yesterday he raised a glass and proclaimed that the Carter name ruled this city. Now, his words rattled in my ears like a cruel joke. Pride has a strange echo, it grows deafening when stripped bare. Richard sat stiff-backed at the head of the long mahogany table, but the tremor in his hand betrayed him as he adjusted his cufflinks. Daniel leaned forward, trying to mask panic behind a scowl, but the sheen of sweat along his temples betrayed the same fear. Around us, the board members whispered among themselves, glances darting, their loyalties slipping like sand through clenched fists. The board chair cleared his throat, his voice sharp as a blade. Gentlemen, we've seen enough to understand the gravity of the matter. This company faces an existential threat not from outside, but from negligence within. His words landed like verdicts. I watched Richard's jaw tighten. He still thought he could bend this room to his will, the way he always had. But times had changed. My presence alone was proof. Daniel couldn't hold back any longer. He shot to his feet, voice cracking. She staged this, don't you see? She's nothing but a fraud, a soldier dressed up as a savior, here to steal what belongs to us. His hand slammed onto the table, rattling glasses. She's been plotting against us for years. It's all lies. The board murmured, uncertainty flickering. For a heartbeat, I could feel their doubts circling me like vultures. That was always the Carter's weapon, making others question reality. But James leaned in, calm and deliberate, his voice carrying the steel of decades in command. Enough. Colonel Carter did not fabricate these files. Every document has been verified, every timestamp logged, every vulnerability confirmed by Pentagon oversight. This is not conjecture. This is evidence. Evidence your so-called heirs ignored. His gaze pinned Daniel like a bayonet to the chest. You call her a fraud? Son, she's the only reason this company still breathes. Daniel faltered, his face flushing crimson, words drying on his tongue. The board no longer whispered. Now they stared, waiting for resolution. The chair lifted a sheet of paper, his hands steady as if this moment had been inevitable. His voice rang out, final and unflinching. Effective immediately, Richard Carter's authority is revoked. Pending investigation, his powers as CEO are suspended. This company will not fall because of arrogance. The words struck harder than any gavel. Richard froze. For a long moment, I thought he hadn't heard. But then his shoulders sagged, his spine collapsing under the weight of truth. He looked across the table at me, and for the first time in his reign, he didn't look like a king. He looked like a man robbed of his crown. Daniel whispered something under his breath, but I barely heard him. My eyes stayed on Richard. The man who had once told me the Carter legacy wasn't mine now stared at me, as if I'd stolen the ground beneath his feet. His lips moved, voice cracked, stripped of thunder. You, my own daughter. The words were not shouted but bled out, heavy and broken, the sound of a dynasty shattering. When empires crack, unexpected voices slip through the rubble. Morning light spilled across the glass towers of downtown, but inside Carter and Cole, the mood was anything but bright. Overnight, the company had transformed from a fortress of arrogance into a battlefield of whispers and suspicion. The boardroom coup had spread like wildfire through every floor. Employees no longer greeted Richard with bowed heads, and Daniel's once cocky stride now drew only sideways glances. By the time I arrived, journalists were already camped outside the revolving doors, cameras poised like vultures waiting for carrion. Their shouted questions about Carter family betrayal echoed off the marble lobby, bouncing like accusations through the atrium. Inside, the employees of Carter and Cole huddled in clusters, eyes darting between screens, phones buzzing with updates. Richard had vanished behind the curtain of lawyers, but Daniel still stalked the hallways like a cornered animal, his pride refusing to acknowledge that the empire was already in shambles. The audit team arrived in a wave of dark suits and clipped voices, badges flashing as they descended upon Daniel's department. His subordinates stiffened as binders, hard drives, and personal devices were swept from desks and sealed into evidence bags. The once loyal staff avoided Daniel's gaze, their whispers loud enough for him to hear, but quiet enough to cut. Words like incompetence and cover-up poisoned the air. He barked orders, but no one obeyed. He was no longer a commander, just a relic of a dynasty too proud to see its end. I watched from the balcony above, arms crossed, the dossier still heavy in my briefcase, though its blade had already cut deep. Below, Daniel's shoulders hunched, his tie loosened, his hands trembling as he attempted to maintain authority. It was pathetic, almost pitiable almost. And then I heard a softer voice. Emma. She approached me in the corridor away from the noise, her presence quiet but steady, eyes not darting like the others. She carried herself differently than the rest of our family, not in arrogance but in observation, always watching, rarely speaking. For years she had survived by being invisible. Now she stepped into the light. You were the only Carter I admired, she whispered, her voice steady enough to cut through the chaos. Her eyes flickered with the weight of words unsaid. Memories of that day 10 years ago, when she couldn't meet my gaze in the boardroom. Now she did. I held her stare for a moment, searching for deceit, but found only truth. For the first time in years I realized I wasn't entirely alone in this war. Before I could respond, a shadow loomed. Daniel. His face was twisted with rage, cheeks blotched red, jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. He shoved past Emma, backing me into the paneled wall of the hallway. His breath was hot, rancid with fury, words spat between clenched teeth. You'll regret humiliating us, he hissed, voice low enough that only I could hear, yet sharp enough to slice. His eyes burned with the desperation of a man losing everything: power, respect, even his name. It was no longer the smug confidence of the heir apparent, but the venom of a brother unraveling. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. My voice was colder than steel. My words deliberate, measured, final. "No, Daniel, I'll remember saving this company while you destroyed it." His jaw slackened, just slightly, enough for me to see the sting land. He staggered back half a step, fist still clenched, but the balance of power had shifted. The hallway swallowed the silence he left behind, broken only by Emma's quiet exhale. The empire was cracking, and from its rubble, new voices were finally beginning to rise. Power doesn't beg, it dictates. The words echoed in my head as the heavy doors of the Pentagon's secure chamber closed behind us. Inside, the room smelled faintly of polished steel and old paper, a place where power wasn't spoken. It was sealed with signatures that could shift entire industries. Around the long mahogany table sat the reluctant faces of Carter and Cole executives, flanked by stone-faced Pentagon officials. Between us lay the contract, thick, official, stamped with the weight of the United States government. They had resisted every step of the way, clawing at scraps of their old authority. But here they were now, pens in hand, their legacy reduced to lines of ink that would bind them under my command's oversight. The board chair, a man who once toasted Richard's speeches with smug approval, now adjusted his tie nervously and cleared his throat. His hand shook as he lifted the pen. "This is unprecedented," he muttered, as though speaking to the air. Then his voice steadied, and he turned to me with a solemn nod. "Colonel Carter, you've done what none of us thought possible. You've saved Carter and Cole, and perhaps something larger. On behalf of the board, we recognize your leadership." Their eyes avoided mine as one by one they signed, but every scratch of ink against paper was a confession of defeat. They weren't partners in this victory. They were prisoners of it, and I made certain they knew it. James leaned close, his voice low enough for only me. "You didn't just save them. You owned them." The truth sat heavy but satisfying. Richard's kingdom, Daniel's promised throne, all of it now passed through me. Not because they granted it, but because I forced their hand. Their arrogance had built the walls. I had turned them into chains. The Pentagon officials watched impassively, no celebration in their eyes, just relief that a liability had been transformed into an asset. To them, this wasn't a family drama. It was national security. And in their world, power didn't beg, it dictated. When the last reluctant executive pushed the signed contract forward, the room seemed to exhale. All eyes shifted to me. I lifted the government-issue pen, steady as a blade in my grip, and scrawled my signature across the final line. With that stroke, Carter and Cole was no longer Richard's empire. It was mine. Silence fell for a heartbeat. Then chairs shifted, murmurs rose, the contract was lifted and stamped. Done. The Carter name, once wielded against me, was now irrevocably bound to my authority. I slipped the pen back onto the table and leaned back in my chair. For the first time in years, I felt the air move differently around me, not the suffocating weight of dismissal, but the sharp edge of respect, whether begrudging or real. The throne Richard had clung to was shattered, and in its place stood something stronger. My phone buzzed in the pocket of my uniform. I slid it out, half expecting another alert, another breach, another battle waiting. But it wasn't the Pentagon. It wasn't James. It wasn't even an enemy. It was my mother. Her message glowed across the screen, quiet but disarming. "Emily, can we talk as family?" The same mouths that spat on me now begged for mercy. The cafe smelled of burnt coffee and cinnamon, but beneath the cozy surface, the air carried a tension so sharp it could cut. Snow fell outside in lazy spirals, muting the noise of the city, but inside the corner booth sat the remnants of what used to be my family's kingdom. Richard, the man who once roared in boardrooms, looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, his shoulders hunched, his eyes ringed with exhaustion, his suit worn like an ill-fitting costume. Margaret clutched a napkin in trembling fingers, her face streaked with the makeup of someone who had tried too hard to cover regret. Daniel sat slouched, his jaw tight, his bitterness radiating like a foul odor. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was its own theater. I sipped the bitter coffee, my uniform coat draped neatly beside me, medals catching the dim cafe light. Let them see what they tried to erase. Margaret's voice broke first. It was small, brittle, not the passive-aggressive sharpness she once wielded at dinner tables. "Emily, we were wrong. All of us. I was wrong. Please, forgive us." Her words tumbled out like broken glass. "You have to understand, we thought we were protecting the legacy. I thought, I thought you'd find another path." Her plea should have stung. Instead, it floated past me, weightless, stripped of the authority it once carried. Richard leaned forward, his hands clasped, the faint tremor of desperation betraying him. "You're still a Carter, Emily. No matter what happened, we can rebuild together. The board may look to you now, but we can stand united as a family. It's not too late." I let the words hang, savoring the irony. These were the same lips that once dismissed me with a smirk, declaring me unworthy of the Carter name, unfit to inherit anything but humiliation. Now they bent toward me, begging for inclusion. The tables had turned, and I had no intention of flipping them back. Daniel snorted, unable to disguise his bitterness. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Sitting there, letting us squirm. You think a uniform makes you untouchable?" His eyes narrowed. "It's politics, Emily, that's all. Without the Pentagon, you're nothing." I set my cup down deliberately, the porcelain clinking against the saucer, slicing through his words. My silence stretched long enough to make even Daniel shift uncomfortably. Finally, I leaned forward, my voice low but clear, every syllable sharp. "Last week I was useless. This week you want me back? Number, I don't need your approval anymore." Margaret's face crumpled, tears welling at the edges. Richard's jaw tightened, as if he might argue, but the weight of my gaze pinned him in place. He knew it was over. Daniel sneered, leaning back with folded arms, spitting the last barb he had left. "You'll never be a real Carter." I met his glare, steady, unflinching. My lips curved into the smallest, coldest smile. I already surpassed that name. The snow outside thickened, muffling the world, while inside the booth, the silence returned, but this time it was mine. They had nothing left to say. While they mourned their downfall, I assented. The Pentagon ceremonial hall shimmered under bright chandeliers, the air electric with the murmur of senators, generals, and dignitaries from far beyond Washington. The flags of the nation draped the walls, their fabric heavy with history, and beneath them rows of polished chairs were filled with faces both proud and resentful. I stood at the center of it all, my uniform pressed sharp, my medals aligned, and my spine straighter than ever before. The sound of boots against marble echoed like a heartbeat as the honor guard took position, a rhythm underscoring the moment that would define me. On the far wall hung photographs of military graduates through the decades. My gaze caught one in particular, a picture of myself at 18, wearing the crisp cadet uniform, hope in my eyes, rejection fresh in my veins. Back then, they told me the Carter name would never be mine to carry in pride. Today, the hall stood still to honor it not because of them, but because of me. That photograph was no longer a memory of exclusion. It was a prophecy fulfilled. The board chair's voice carried across the chamber. "By authority vested in this office and in recognition of exemplary service to the United States, we hereby promote Colonel Emily Carter to the rank of Brigadier General." The star gleamed as it was pinned to my shoulder, light catching on its polished edge. Applause thundered through the hall, but beyond the sound of hands and voices, I felt the quiet roar of vindication. I stepped to the podium, breath steady, heart burning. Rows of expectant faces leaned in, my voice cut clean through the silence. Sometimes the path everyone warns you against is exactly the one you're meant to take. I was told I was unworthy, that I was useless, that I didn't belong, but strength doesn't ask for permission. It rises in silence, in scars, in persistence. And today, I stand here not because I was welcomed, but because I refused to be erased. The words fell heavy, not as rhetoric, but as confession, each sentence a shard of the journey I carved through mockery and betrayal. In the back row, I saw Margaret dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Richard slumped, his once proud posture broken into resignation, and Daniel stiff with fury, arms crossed, jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. Their presence no longer cut me, they were simply shadows, witnesses to a truth they could no longer bend. As the applause swelled again, a young lieutenant stepped forward, his voice quiet but trembling with urgency. "General Carter," he said, almost afraid to meet my eyes. "My family, they don't support me either. They think I'm wasting my time here. But your story, it gives me hope." I smiled, not the bitter smile I once wore at their dinner table, but one born of strength earned through fire. I leaned slightly toward him, my voice softer now, just for him. Then let me tell you a story. It starts at a dinner table. The hall seemed to freeze at the weight of those words, the perfect circle closing. Glasses clinked in the distance as champagne was poured, the sound echoing the night when mockery had defined me. This time, I raised my own glass high, the reflection of my star shining in its surface. Richard bowed his head, Margaret wiped another tear, and Daniel's glare seared through the room like a dying flame refusing to surrender. But I no longer cared for their verdicts. Their power had been stripped, their arrogance unmasked, their dynasty shattered. I had surpassed their name, and in doing so I had forged something greater, my own. The star gleamed on my shoulder, the crowd rose in applause, and for the first time I felt at peace. Betrayal once silenced her at the dinner table, yet in the end it was that very silence that thundered across boardrooms and halls of power. Justice did not come quickly, nor without scars, but it came with the weight of truth and the collapse of arrogance. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime, proving that no dynasty, however proud, is immune to reckoning. And sometimes, one act of defiance is enough to rewrite an entire legacy. Like, share, subscribe, and comment your thoughts about this story. Comment 1 if you felt the same fire of justice, or 2 if you believe the ending still left you unsatisfied.